Sometime after her death, someone gave an order: erase her. Not just her name, but her face and her statues, every trace that she had ever sat on Egypt's throne. Workers went through a temple carved into the cliffs at Deir el-Bahari and chiseled her image out of the stone, block by block. They smashed her statues and buried the pieces in a pit. Later, king lists skip straight past her, as if 20 years of her reign had never happened. She had ruled Egypt as a full king, one of only a small number of women in 3,000 years of Egyptian history who ever did, and someone worked for years to make sure it was forgotten. Her name was Hatshepsut. None of this is legend. It is carved in stone, or carved out of it, and still there to read today. If that is the kind of history you want more of, subscribing costs nothing and helps this reach people who would enjoy it too. This was Dynasty 18, the same line of kings that would later include Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, near the height of Egypt's new kingdom power. Hatshepsut was the daughter of Thutmose I, one of Egypt's most successful warrior kings, who pushed the empire's borders deep into Nubia and as far as the Euphrates. Egypt was wealthy from trade and largely free of major wars, exactly the kind of stability that let questions of who truly held the throne matter less than usual, at least while she was alive. As royal custom required, she married her own half-brother, Thutmose II, and when he died young, the throne passed to his son by another wife, a boy who would grow up to be Thutmose III. Hatshepsut, the boy's aunt and stepmother, began as his regent. Within a few years, she did something only a handful of women in Egypt's long history ever managed. She took the full titulary of a king, the crook and flail, the ceremonial false beard, a throne name written inside a cartouche exactly like any male pharaoh before her. Her temple walls went further, carving the claim that the god Amun himself had fathered her, visiting her mother in the form of Thutmose I, so that her right to the throne came from a god, not merely a father. For roughly 2 decades, she and Thutmose III were both named as king on Egypt's monuments, though every image from the period makes clear whose power actually ran the country. Under Hatshepsut, Egypt built more than it fought. Her signature project rose in white limestone terraces against the cliffs at Deir el-Bahari, a mortuary temple designed by her steward and architect, Senenmut, a man whose closeness to the queen has fed a century of speculation with no proof on either side. More statues of Senenmut survive than of almost any other non-royal official from ancient Egypt, an unusual honor that only deepens the question of exactly how close to the throne he stood. She also raised towering obelisks at Karnak in honor of Amun, granite needles cut and hauled from a single quarry, among the tallest ever set upright in Egypt. On her temple's walls, she recorded her most celebrated achievement, a trading expedition to the distant land of Punt, likely somewhere along the Red Sea's African coast. Egyptian ships came home loaded with incense trees, gold, and exotic animals, and Hatshepsut had the whole voyage carved in loving detail, down to the shape of the Puntite chief's wife. It remains some of the most vivid narrative relief to survive from the ancient world, and for nearly 2 decades, Egypt under her was stable, wealthy, and largely at peace. At some point after the pharaoh Hatshepsut died, her record began to disappear. Her cartouches were hacked off temple walls across Egypt. Statues showing her as a sphinx or as a king were pulled down, broken at the neck and waist, and buried in a quarry pit near her own temple, where excavators found them nearly 3,000 years later, in pieces. Scribes compiling later king lists left her reign out entirely, folding her years into Thutmose III's count as if he alone had ruled that whole time. Whoever did this worked methodically, temple by temple, over what most scholars believe was years, not days. It reads less like vandalism than a deliberate attempt to erase one fact, that a woman had once worn the crown of Egypt as fully as any man. In Egyptian belief, this was not merely political spite. A person's name, spoken and written, was thought to sustain their spirit in the afterlife forever, erase it from every wall and doorway, and in theory, you did not just rewrite history, you extinguished someone's existence beyond death itself. Whoever ordered Hatshepsut's erasure was not simply covering up an inconvenient reign. By Egyptian religious logic, they were trying to end her a second time. Her architect fared little better. Senenmut's own statues and tomb inscriptions were later defaced too, in what looks like a separate, smaller act of erasure, and nobody has ever settled why the Queen's closest official shared something of her fate. For most of the 20th century, the obvious suspect was Thutmose III himself, the stepson who had shared his throne with her and, in this telling, resented her for it. But the timeline argues against a simple revenge story. The worst of the destruction did not begin right after Hatshepsut's death, when Thutmose III finally ruled alone. It began late in his reign, decades later, long after any personal grudge would have had reason to still be burning. His own military campaigns, 17 of them by most counts, only picked up in earnest after Hatshepsut's death, giving him 2 full decades to build his own reputation as Egypt's undisputed warrior king before anyone moved against her memory. There is also a stranger clue. Rather than tear down one of Hatshepsut's great obelisks at Karnak, workers under Thutmose III built a sandstone structure that enclosed it, hiding the tribute to her from view while leaving the stone itself untouched, which is why it still stands today. That is not what pure hatred looks like. It looks like someone managing a problem quietly. Archaeologists have even been able to date some of the damage because later construction was built directly on top of the vandalized reliefs, sealing them in place. Work that buries an insult also preserves it, and it is largely thanks to that accident that scholars can say roughly when the destruction happened at all. Most Egyptologists now think the order came near the end of Thutmose III's life, or even under his son and successor, Amenhotep II, and that the target was never Hatshepsut the person so much as the precedent she had set. A woman had ruled as king once. If that fact stood plainly in the record, it might happen again, and it could complicate the succession Thutmose III was trying to lock in for his own line. Erasing her, on this theory, was not an act of rage. It was cold politics, aimed at closing a door before anyone else tried to walk through it. For centuries afterward, nobody even understood what they were looking at. Early scholars reading the surviving inscriptions at Deir el-Bahari found kingly titles and masculine grammar attached to what was clearly, in places, a woman's image, and assumed there had to be 2 separate kings sharing one monument. It took decades of careful study before Egyptologists pieced together that this was one person, a queen who had ruled, quite literally, as a king. Historians still do not agree on who gave the final order, and the evidence, a few hundred damaged inscriptions, a hidden obelisk, and a pit of broken statues, comes with no confession from anyone. It may never let the case fully close. Which explanation convinces you more? A stepson's old grudge, or a colder calculation about who gets to rule after him? Tell me in the comments. And if you are wondering how her temple at Deir el-Bahari still stands today, largely intact, when so much else was destroyed, that is a story worth its own night.